نواصل الآن
We will continue our general debate. The General Assembly will now hear an address by His Highness Sheikh Jabir Al-Mubarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, Prime Minister of the State of Kuwait. I request protocol to escort His Highness.
يسعدني كثيرا.
It is a great pleasure to welcome His Highness Sheikh Jabir Al-Mubarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, Prime Minister of the State of Kuwait, and to invite him to address the Assembly. You have the floor, Your Highness.
سيد الرئيس.
Mr. President, Your Highnesses and Excellencies, Your Excellency Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you. At the outset, it is my pleasure, on behalf of the government and people of the State of Kuwait, to extend our sincere congratulations to you personally and your friendly country, the Republic of Ecuador, on your election to the presidency of the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. I would also like to reassure you of our full support on all what would facilitate your work and the fulfillment of your responsibilities. We are fully confident of your ability to assume this role, and we are certain that your experience in international affairs will contribute positively to the conduct of the work of this session. Allow me to seize this opportunity to express my country's sincere appreciation of the outstanding efforts of your predecessor, Mr. Miroslav Lajčák, as he so capably and successfully presided over the previous session. Allow me also to commend the great efforts of His Excellency the Secretary General in leading this organization according to a vision and ideas based on the principles and aims of the UN Charter, centered around the maintenance of international peace and security. We stress our support of his reformative initiatives, particularly relating to the peaceful settlement of conflicts, which seeks to promote preventive diplomacy. These ideas moved the work of the United Nations from an academic framework and limited experimental phases to systematic and systemic application in accordance with an international plan seeking to harmonize effective reforms that would advance the role of the United Nations. Mr. President, preventing and resolving conflicts by peaceful means has been and continues to be one of the most important reasons for the establishment of the United Nations. After the bloody experiences of the First and Second World Wars, and despite their unprecedented catastrophic consequences on humanity, those wars were the original motivation to develop a meaningful international system to protect our present and future generations from the scourge of war. The past 7 decades have witnessed historical and concrete roles for the United Nations, during which it has developed its working methods and expanded its mandates to include humanitarian, political, security, development, and economic issues in various parts of the world. However, the increase of challenges and the exacerbation of the severity of conflicts, as well as the risk they pose for international peace and security, have exposed the urgent need to promote the ability of the United Nations to provide the required response to the challenges our world faces today, such as the spread of violence, extremism, and terrorism, as well as the dangers of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the continuous violations of human rights, climate change, and other challenges. The proposals and plans that the Secretary General has introduced to restructure the Secretariat with a view to enhance its effectiveness and increase its efficiency, as well as to ensure that its effort in ending conflicts are not squandered, come as a preliminary important step to transform the problem of reform from a hypothetical discussion to a realistic application. We renew our support to this step, which is part of the aspirations of the peoples of the world towards this organization as a safe haven and the guarantor of a world of peace and stability. Mr. President, "9 months into our non-permanent membership in the Security Council for the period of 2018-2019, the state of Kuwait has become increasingly aware of the need to reform the Security Council to make it more capable of shouldering its responsibilities and face up to the growing challenges of today's world. It must reflect the international reality in which we live today. This reform must strengthen its credibility and legitimacy and ensure a permanent Arab representation that goes in line with the number of Arab member states and the size of their contribution to the various activities of the United Nations. Since the first day of its non-permanent membership in the Security Council, the state of Kuwait adopted an objective approach in dealing with various issues and dossiers on the Council's agenda. Such an approach is a realistic reflection of its foreign policy, which is based on the respect of the sovereignty and independence of states and non-interference in their internal affairs. We also believe in the noble message of the United Nations, which is to maintain international peace and security. Kuwait's involvement with the Security Council's agenda was not constrained by any cultural, ethnic, political, or geographical consideration, even though its agenda is replete with Middle Eastern issues. Through our non-permanent membership in the Security Council, we sought to go beyond the routine of participation in the work of the Council. Therefore, we aim to broaden our horizons, to elevate the rule of international law with all its branches, including respect for human rights, building a better future for the world's population, and totally avoiding selectivity and bias in dealing with various issues. This trend is based on the Charter of the United Nations and the diplomatic legacy of the State of Kuwait. It gives preference to peaceful solutions and mediation efforts between parties. This reflects how we deal with the difficult issues and crises ravaging our world today. Human beings and their inherent rights continue to be the pillars of our foreign policy. This is based on the directions of His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Hamad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, may God protect him, the Emir of the State of Kuwait, who was honored by this esteemed organization as a leader of humanitarian work. Mr. President, the Palestinian question is one of the most important and oldest issues on the agenda of the Security Council. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the adoption of Resolution 56 in August 1948. This was the first time the Council dealt with this protracted question. Successive resolutions were adopted by the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly, as well as multiple international and regional initiatives to lay the foundations of peace in the Middle East. However, Israel persists in its intransigence, rejecting and ignoring resolutions of international legitimacy. It continues its expansionist policies through the establishment of illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territories. This constitutes a gross violation and blatant rejection to resolutions of international legitimacy, latest of which Resolution 2334, which called upon Israel to stop all its illegal settlement practices. Furthermore, Israel continues to desecrate the sanctity of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. It continues its abusive violations of human rights and international humanitarian law by detaining thousands of Palestinians in its prisons and detention centers. Through its repeated military aggressions on the Gaza Strip, during which it did not observe the basic principles for the protection of civilians in armed conflict. It did not respect the agreed-upon international measures set forth in the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949 on the protection of civilians in time of war. The State of Kuwait seeks to fully implement Security Council resolutions. We therefore tabled a draft resolution at the Security Council last May, which called upon Israel, the occupying power, to immediately cease the use of illegitimate force against civilians. This draft resolution also called for international protection to ensure the safety and security of the Palestinian civilians in the occupied territories. Although the draft resolution was not adopted, the State of Kuwait will spare no effort to support the legitimate political rights of the Palestinian people. We will continue to spare no effort until the occupation ends and until a permanent, just and comprehensive peace is reached in accordance with the Land for Peace principle, the Arab Peace Initiative, and resolutions of international legitimacy, which call for the two-state solution and the establishment of a Palestinian state on the borders of the 4th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, the Syrian crisis entered its 8th year. The international community is still unable to find a solution that ends its devastating consequences and horrific losses. Throughout, Syrian citizens have been the main victim of a conflict that claimed the life of more than 400,000 people. Moreover, more than 12 million people have become refugees and displaced. The state of Kuwait, in cooperation and coordination with the friendly delegation of the Kingdom of Sweden, tabled Resolution 2041 on the humanitarian situation in Syria. The Security Council unanimously adopted this resolution. This was a positive sign of the solidarity and unity of the Security Council and its work to put an end to human suffering and hostilities and to guarantee humanitarian access to those in need on Syrian territories in a timely fashion. Yet, today, we regret that the resolution was not implemented on the ground. These efforts take place in the context of the humanitarian role of the state of Kuwait in dealing with the deteriorating humanitarian conditions in Syria since the beginning of its crisis. In the course of these efforts, the state of Kuwait hosted 3 international conferences for donors to support the humanitarian situation in Syria. We offered voluntary contributions amounting to $1.6 billion in these conferences. We renew our principled and unwavering position regarding the Syrian crisis. We reject any military solution to this crisis, and we stress the need to intensify efforts to bring all parties together and launch a dialogue to reach a peaceful settlement in line with relevant Security Council resolutions, especially Resolution 2254. The goal is to achieve and reach a political reality on which various components of the Syrian people find consensus. This should preserve the unity and independence of Syria in order to achieve the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people, which guarantee bringing to justice the perpetrators of crimes. Mr. President, our brothers in Yemen are going through sensitive historic challenges with serious implications in the political, humanitarian, and economic levels. These are the consequences of the coup against the legitimate authority by the Houthi group in September 2014. Houthis continue to reject the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions as well as international initiatives to achieve a political settlement. They continue to pose a threat to the peace and stability of the region by launching ballistic missiles on the sisterly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This threatens the safety of free navigation in the Strait of Bab al-Mandab and the Red Sea. We strongly condemn such activities which run counter to international law and international humanitarian law. We renew our full commitment to respecting Yemen's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. We also reject any interference in Yemeni internal affairs. We stress our full support to the constitutional legitimacy of Yemen. This is the country which was the cradle of Arab civilization. We also stress the need for prioritizing the political solution to the crisis by resorting to the 3 agreed-upon references. These are the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, the outcomes of the Comprehensive National Dialogue, and relevant Security Council resolutions, especially Resolution 2216. Kuwait's preventive diplomacy was always based on mediation and political settlement. For this reason, and during 2016, Kuwait hosted political consultations between the Yemeni parties for more than 100 days under the auspices of the United Nations. We renew our readiness to host our Yemeni brethren for the signing of a final agreement whenever it is reached by Yemeni parties. We stress our ongoing support to United Nations efforts and the efforts of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to Yemen to achieve a peaceful solution for this crisis so it does not last for long. The coup against the legitimacy of Yemen had consequences which played a major role in the deterioration of the humanitarian situation there. Such results have led to frightening and unprecedented statistics. In fact, the Yemeni people continue to suffer and strive to secure their daily sustenance. The state of Kuwait has not ignored the needs of its brothers in Yemen. We therefore contributed with $350 million, the last portion of which was $250 million, which we pledged at the Geneva conference held last April. That amount has been delivered in full to UN agencies and their mechanisms engaged in the humanitarian activities. The purpose of all of this assistance was to improve the severity of the dangerous deterioration of the humanitarian, health, and economic standards. However, such deterioration of standards will not stop without the restoration of peace and stability in Yemen in order to protect its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and guarantee the return of harmony among all its groups. Mr. President, the growing phenomenon of terrorism and violent extremism in the world, especially in the Middle East, is an unprecedented challenge which has hit the world order at its heart. This has happened through the evolution of the ideology of the secretive and rogue organization which draped itself with the cloak of Islam to achieve its destructive intentions. The so-called Daesh Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant is a terrorist group which has perpetrated atrocities, including widespread murder and destruction in various areas of the Middle East. It has led to the establishment of an international coalition to fight it. In this regard, the state of Kuwait has provided material and moral support in line with the agreement on combating terrorism adopted by the League of Arab States and the OIC, as well as the United Nations from 1999 to 2001. Our brothers in Iraq have been the first victims of these crimes, the crimes of this terrorist group. Yet the collaboration of the international community represented by the Security Council with the Iraqi government played a major role and was highly effective in cleansing Iraq from the geographic positioning of that serious terror cancer. We believe that post-war peace and security cannot be achieved without repairing the destructive effects that run counter to the principles of humanity. Therefore, my country hosted an international conference on rebuilding Iraq. At that conference, pledges exceeded $30 billion, of which the state of Kuwait has contributed $2 billion. We renew our firm position on offering all forms of assistance to Iraq to enable it to fulfill its outstanding obligations provided for by relevant Security Council resolutions, to assist it in regaining its role and position regionally and internationally. At the same regional level, and based on the same principles that call for strengthening the rules of good neighborliness and non-interference in internal affairs of states, as set forth in the United Nations Charter and international law, we renew our call to the Islamic Republic of Iran to take serious confidence-building measures to establish relations based on cooperation, mutual respect, common interests, that would lead or that would guide efforts and capabilities to promote development and construction. This would reflect the future aspiration of all peoples in the region for a life of peace and security. Mr. President, in accordance with what we have mentioned earlier regarding the role that we have committed ourselves to pursue, which is based on prioritizing humanitarian cases and responding to the tragic situation facing the refugees of the Rohingya Muslim minority of Myanmar, the state of Kuwait contributed and helped in organizing the Security Council visit to both Bangladesh and Myanmar. The aim of this visit was to discuss the crisis of these refugees and get acquainted with their situation and assess the steps taken by the authorities of these two countries in this crisis. This is one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. We will continue our efforts as members of the Security Council, and we will continue to cooperate with all parties concerned to guarantee a safe, voluntary, and dignified return to these refugees and hold accountable all those responsible for the crimes committed against them. Mr. President, the adoption of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is one of the most remarkable phases of the United Nations. That agenda is an extension of the efforts by the international community based on the primary rules of the Millennium Development Goals. These MDGs have achieved their noble objective, which stimulated the transition of the United Nations from defining relative goals in confronting the challenges to a new phase of comprehensiveness and search for solutions for root causes. It is human-centered. The agenda is human-centered. This phase of international obligations and solidarity on the international level will represent a great leap to achieve sustainable development goals, eradicate poverty with all its manifestations, and ensure that all human beings attain their equal rights to dignity, education, health, political participation, and the empowerment of youth and women, as well as to countering climate change. This would also address the effects of climate change in the context of the historic Paris Agreement. This is because environmental degradation is one of the main obstacles to attaining these goals. In line with the principle of shared responsibility, taking into account the disparity of responsibilities and burdens of states. Among the most prominent challenges facing sustainable development is perhaps the issues of migrants and refugees. We therefore look forward to the International Conference on Migration to be held in December of this year in Marrakesh. At that conference, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration will be adopted. As Kuwait seeks to improve the welfare of people, we have undertaken measures to implement the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And these measures were a priority over various national plans and programs with the participation of all sectors of society. We established this through a futuristic national vision for a new Kuwait to be accomplished by 2035. We seek to transform Kuwait into a regional center and a financial, commercial, cultural, and institutional pioneer. The state of Kuwait has always shouldered its regional and international responsibilities to achieve development in all its economic, social, and environmental perspectives. We made long strides to implement the initiatives of His Highness, the Emir of the State of Kuwait, to promote international partnerships. Such partnerships complement the continuous history of Kuwait in the developmental and humanitarian fields. In fact, Kuwait spared no effort in offering development assistance to developing countries, as well as least developed countries. We provided assistance to 106 countries until today. We play our part as an active member of the United Nations through our various institutions, most prominently the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development. We offer grants and soft loans for infrastructure projects in developing countries. This assistance is more than double the internationally agreed upon percentage for official development assistance. I can only stress the commitment of the State of Kuwait to the international multilateral system and to the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter. We believe that we need to move forward with all efforts to guarantee the continuation and the contribution of our organization by having all states fulfill their commitments and responsibilities to which they have consented under agreements and international conferences. This will contribute to finding fair and just solutions to global threats and challenges. This way, we would have accomplished the lofty goal of the maintenance of international peace and security. In conclusion, allow me to thank you for your attention and apologize for taking too long. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you.
باسم الجمعيه العامه أود أن أشكر.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Highness on his statement. I would like to request protocol to escort His Highness.
سوف تستمع الجمعية العامة لبيان يلقيه دولة السيد زافي بيتيل رئيس
The General Assembly will now listen to an address by Mr. Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister, Minister of State, and Minister of Communication and Media and Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. I would request the protocol to escort His Excellency to the podium.